So welcome everyone. Hello, I'm Josephine Kim. I'm Senior Lecturer on Education and the Director of the School Counseling Licensure Pathway here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Welcome to Education Now. Today we're going to discuss solutions for a widespread problem. During his most recent term in office, former US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy declared that America was facing a loneliness epidemic. And he warned that social disconnection creates health risks that can be as deadly as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We have three very knowledgeable guests today to help to address this problem of loneliness. And don't forget, we actually want to hear from you and your questions for our panelists. So you can submit those during our conversation using the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also access closed captioning there. So let's get started by welcoming our guests. We have Milena Batanova. She's a Director of Research and Evaluation with Making Caring Common project here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. We also have Allison Gilbert, a journalist and co-author of a book called The Joy of Connections, 100 Ways to Beat Loneliness and Live a Happier and More Meaningful Life. Allison authored the book actually with the behavioral therapist and talk show host, the late Dr. Ruth Westheimer. Our third panelist is Eric Wood, the Director of the Counseling and Mental Health at Texas Christian University. Eric is also an executive board member of the Association for University and College Counseling Center Directors. So welcome everyone. Milena, we're just going to dive in and get started with you. You and your colleagues at the Making Caring Common have undertaken a lot of research on the problem of loneliness. Can you explain what you've discovered about who this problem is affecting and just how widespread it is?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much. And thanks, for having me here. It's such a pleasure. So for a little bit of context, we conducted a nationally representative survey of adults in America with YouGov, a popular research and data analytics group last year in May. And we found that 21% of adults said they're lonely or feeling lonely frequently or always or almost all of the time in the past 30 days. But we also found that young adults were slightly lonelier at like 24%, and people aged 30 to 44 were actually the loneliest at almost 30%. Um, we didn't see other demographic differences except for income. So Americans earning less than $30,000 a year were also the loneliest at 29%. And I do want to highlight that we also asked about different types or dimensions of loneliness or experiences of loneliness. And we found that 34% of Americans said they don't have meaningful groups or communities that they feel like they're a part of.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I mean, Making Caring Common also found a strong correlation between loneliness and mental health problems. In fact, one of your reports found that 81% of adults who were lonely also reported experiencing anxiety or depression. How do you explain the connection?
Yeah, so we tend to find that loneliness is highly correlated with anxiety or depressive symptoms, as well as a little to no sense of meaning or purpose. And we've also found this in other recent research that we've done, where both young adults and teens say they have little to no purpose. It was something like almost 60% in young adults and almost 40% of teens reporting that they have little to no purpose or meaning. And so that's why in our recent report, we said that loneliness may be the tip of the iceberg because it's a constellation of things or issues going on. And just this morning, actually, we received like a really sweet email from a high school senior who wrote us saying that all of this really hit home for him because he's been noticing that his classmates, like while his classmates seem connected through social media, they still struggle with feeling like they don't matter, like their lives have no meaning. So, you know, I think it's so important that when we talk about solutions and strategies, we really need to understand what's going on, like what's under the hood of all this. And really, we need to not only, I think, tailor our strategies and our interventions, but also ensure that they're comprehensive enough, right? Like focusing on what we can do as individuals, but also our social infrastructure, right? So things like the places and the programs and the policies that are available to us that are kind of like setting the stage or the ground for, you know, things like mattering or having purpose.
I appreciate this idea of under the hood. It sounds like there's class issues, there's all sorts of things, existential things like meaning and purpose. And so, Eric, coming to you, loneliness seems like a significant problem for young people. We know this is definitely including college students. And so, what steps are colleges, including your own, taking to address this issue?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a great question. I think loneliness is a core when people even talk about variables like student retention. Yeah, they forget that it's not really the mental health, like the extreme cases that are at risk for retention. It's actually people feeling they're disconnected, and that's why they actually might seek another university. But for us, that's one thing TCU is known for is that we started what we call peer support communities, and we're a counseling center. We do clinical stuff. But our mindset is we were finding so many students who just did not feel connected at all to a collective. And so our peer support community is really just based off of community buildings. It's not, some of them might be mental health, like we have one for depression, anxiety, but we also have one for supportive gaming. They literally play like role-playing games. We have one for planning. They literally spend time planning. And the ideal is that if you can give students a sense of community, that is a buffer for a lot of things, not only just for attention, but if you look at any mental health, having that secure base, whether just pick a clinical factor, that's going to be a buffer and not a lot of variables you can say that for. So the idea of actually fostering a sense of community, and TC, we're known for having a connected community anyway, that has been a huge boost for us. And then also the idea of just building a social infrastructure. So not just like one office, but how you connect it to offices throughout campuses. And we've had a lot of success. We have a learning network on our peer support communities. Right now, we have over 115 schools in that. And we invite schools to our campus. Our counseling center is literally split between the clinical side and the peer support side. So this is really one of our main objectives that we do.
So connections, community sounds
Yes.
really important. I mean, especially for many college-age students who've lived through a very isolating time during the COVID-19 pandemic, which literally took them out of physical, right, spaces for a long time. And so, are there certain skills that this group needs to learn and practice to mitigate loneliness?
Absolutely. I think it varies. I mean, you mentioned the pandemic. I mean, this cohort, the 2020 class of 28, this is the first cohort who were in middle school when the pandemic happened, you know? So they had a lot of disruption in the formative years. And then they went to a new school in high school after that. So they're coming here and maybe not have had a lot of opportunities and not an experience to connect. And maybe they over relied on technology, which can be a barrier, you know, to actually form a connection, depending on how you use it. So a lot of them might have a lot of anxiety because they're coming to big college campuses and don't know how to actually form connections. But really the main thing is, can you give them opportunities? Because I think what I'm noticing is this cohort may not be the best at instigating. I mean, you might have literally two people in the student union sitting right next to each other. They don't say anything. So how do you give structure opportunities to make it easier for them? And from my experience, I think that's been one of the best interventions because once they're in the room and they break the ice, I think we're just social beings by nature. But it's like, how do you get to that point where you can actually help them break the ice?
Sounds like things that maybe we would have assumed for them to
Yes,
already possess. We kind of have to scaffold a little bit more now intentionally. Thank you for that. So,
absolutely.
Allison, yes, moving to you, Dr. Ruth developed something known as this menu for connection. So curious about it. Could you briefly tell us about the different parts of this framework?
When we went to devise a structure for what became Dr. Ruth Westheimer's final book, we wanted to orient the advice that we were giving in the Joy of Connections in a framework that we would all recognize. So we borrowed it from the USDA plate, or that food pyramid that we are all familiar with growing up. Like, what should you be eating every day to be nurtured and healthy? So you'd have protein or grains or dairy, you know what I'm talking about. And so Dr. Ruth's menu for connection explains that we need 5 elements to forge deep, meaningful, rich, satisfying connections. Self, meaning look in the mirror, and we could talk about that in a second. What are you doing, perhaps inadvertently, that may be making it more challenging for you, hard to admit, to form these connections? Then there's community. There's friends and lovers, because of course it was a Dr. Ruth book, so we had to include lovers, romantic relationships. And we don't want to exclude family, nor do we want to leave out technology. And Eric talked about this a little bit. Technology, when used with purpose, can actually be an engine for connection. So we shouldn't just dismiss technology summarily. There is a role if used with purpose. And so that's what Dr. Ruth's menu for connection is all about. But I will emphasize self, what you bring to the table or don't, is the biggest part of this puzzle. And that is sometimes surprising when we're talking about connections and our relationships to one another, that the most important ingredient is to look at yourself in your own words and your own behaviors.
I'm really appreciating how it's both the outside facing piece, but it's also the introspection and looking inward to see how you might be contributing and presenting to the world. Staying on that, as you mentioned, self is the largest part of this menu for connection framework. What can individuals do to address that part? To what extent is it kind of learned, as a skill? And where can education play a role?
I love that question because it takes courage. It is hard. As we just heard, you can have 2 students sitting nearby each other, and who's going to raise their hand, so to speak, and make that first move in terms of wanting to crack that moment that feels kind of so hard to do. But when we do that, when we get that courage, here's what else that we need: authenticity. We also need vulnerability. If everything is always good in our lives, if school is easy, our parents are great, our girlfriends, our boyfriends, our partners are wonderful, and nothing ever goes badly, it's like sand through your fingers. There's nothing in that conversation with somebody else to grab onto. There's no meat, right? You need meat to deepen a conversation. So if you can have the courage to be authentic and vulnerable, to really explain what's going on in your life, that gives that other person an opportunity to, guess what? Share what's going on in their life too. And that's the recipe for a genuine, authentic, and meaningful connection that goes beyond the, hey, how you doing? Like beyond the superficial to get somewhere deep and meaningful.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And again, really appreciating. Let's think about how you might be contributing and what more you can be doing. Along those lines, Milena, I know you and your colleagues, the research also highlights the need for a social infrastructure that can really help develop these meaningful relationships with others. Can you explain that part a little bit more?
Yeah, and I'm happy that Eric mentioned that as well, going off of, what I was saying earlier too. Yeah, I think while the self is clearly important, loneliness and social connection are much more than just a personal issue. In our survey, over 60% of adults said they blame our society or how people are in general over lonely people themselves, which I thought was really encouraging, because sometimes I do hear in the media or in podcasts a little bit of blame on lonely individuals themselves. And so it was unsurprising and nice that when we asked our survey respondents what would help reduce loneliness more broadly and strengthen our communities. About 3/4 of them said they want more activities and fun community events. And they also said they want public spaces that are more accessible and that are connection focused. So things like green spaces, playgrounds, just spaces to really be able to connect. So, I think it can't just be up to us as individuals, but also the places and the communities that we live in. I think they need to enhance, right, our social connections, our existing networks, but also provide opportunities for new and diverse experiences.
Thank you. I'm noticing, here in the New England area, the winters are very long, and oftentimes young people just don't have physical spaces where they can go and socialize and do all these things. And so thanks for also highlighting that. Eric, Allison, I wonder if you have anything to add to that piece about the social infrastructure.
Yeah, I think it's just really important. I think it's what colleges can do in terms of society. Almost like who better can do it for this generation than colleges, because we have a campus, they're all part of it, they're all interacting with each other. But even I think most people, we talked about technology, that can also be a part of the social infrastructure. Like for us, all of our peer support, they all have group meets and discords that they interact with. We even have a virtual where students can come and just get group meets to meet other students just to go to like football games with or to have meals with and things like that. And one of the initiatives I love our students started was a virtual letter of care campaign where they can actually, one student could request just a letter, and then we have another student just respond it. We all do that through, internet, through technology. And so they never met in person, but the outreach, just having someone kind of write something simple, caring, the impact of that was amazing. So there's a lot of creative ways to do social infrastructure. It doesn't need to take a lot of money to do it. I think it's more of just a mentality. How do you be very purposeful and intentional and actually giving students the opportunity to connect?
I think it's also really important to use our words and our vocabulary, just like you would say to a toddler, use your words to say or express what they are frustrated with. The more we talk about this, the more we give words and voice to this issue that's really invisible to so many, the more we will decrease shame and stigma and taboo. Because in our research for the Joy of Connections and all the talks that I'm giving now on this book tour, very few people want to raise their hand and say out loud, I'm lonely, or to admit that in my home, my parents don't really see me. Because when you are supposed to be feeling the most loved and we don't feel that, or we don't feel seen, that can make us feel especially tender that we really don't find a place to belong anywhere, even when we're supposed to feel seen and supported and valued. And so I feel like these types of conversations, if we keep having them out loud and you name the problem, we can talk about the solutions, we can then destigmatize it, and students and their parents and those of us who care about students and parents can best support one another, because I feel that once we give voice, there can come solutions.
Yes, thank you. The importance of naming the issue for what it is. I really appreciate that. This is where we engage the audience and their questions. Milena, I'm actually coming to you with this first question. For younger generations, is there a strong correlation between mental health issues, loneliness, and the increasing role of technology in our lives?
Yeah, we get this question a lot. And I know the answer is probably not what people want to hear, but it's a mixed bag. I feel like the research is all over on this. There's research, right, to show that yes, technology is absolutely contributing to the problem. There's research to show that it's not really a part of the problem. And then there's folks who say it's more of an amplifier, right? It can be linked to the problem depending on where you're at in your, mental health and whatnot. When we asked, so in that survey that we did last May, we also asked adults, what contributes? What do you think contributes to loneliness in America? And yes, the top contributing factor that people selected was technology. But it was also followed by families lacking quality time together, Um, what else? Working too much, being too exhausted, overworked, and mental health, hurting our relationships. I do want to point out, though, that in other recent research we did on young adults specifically, when we asked them what contributes to their negative mental health, social media was low on the list. The top factors were actually financial worries, and it was something like over 50% of young people saying that's the top contributing factor, finances, which makes sense, right? Like we are in dire circumstances, I would say, with the cost of living, and just how much it costs, to do anything these days. So it was financial worries. It was the sense that things are just falling apart in society, lacking direction, right? So going back to the lacking meaning, purpose stuff, and lacking in skills. So kind of going back to what Allison was talking about, lacking in skills and knowing how to relate to people.
Thank you. And Eric, you've already alluded to this on your campus at Texas Christian, but what kind of games do you use to help manage loneliness on your campus? If you have any specific things, I think they're curious about that.
Yeah, the gaming one is probably one of our largest peer support gaming. And I'll give it to the students because they purposely said we're not going to do video games. They actually want to come to the table. So it's what they call role-playing tabletop games, like anywhere from Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not a gamer, I couldn't tell you. But literally have different campaigns every single night. We have students coming on the weekends, they're in lunch. And like I said, part of our center is different lounges. We actually have a lounge just for them to build connection. But through those games, it actually is a mental health component. We have a psychologist here who's really into gaming and talk about how you can use that in terms of building your character, in terms of self-esteem, relating to people, interacting with people. So there is a lot of social skills that we kind of weave in, and that's why we call it supportive gaming, because the staff support actually weaves the social skills into that. But just, yeah, when you're interacting, no matter what you're doing with other people, yeah, all those skills take place in practice in the here and now. So that's why we have it.
Thank you. Thanks
I
for
would add
that.
one thing, if that's
Yes,
okay, Joe.
sure.
I think what's interesting to learn as a young adult, which is counter to the wants and desires of social media, where more is better, the more likes, the more follows, the more people who are commenting on your posts, that's about quantity. And what's important to remind all of us is that deep, meaningful connection is really not about mass. It's about keeping it tight and deep. And so we don't need 100, nor can we probably have 100 of the most best, incredible friendships where we can go and turn and give our deepest secrets to 100 people. We want to think smaller, which kind of lowers the temperature of what's required to make us feel seen and special. And so to remind us that it's smaller, not wider. And I would also echo just one more practical piece of advice that comes from the joy of connections. When we think about purpose, and I see a lot of those questions that are coming up in the chat and the Q&A, how about purpose? So when we think about how we spend our free time outside of work and outside of class, perhaps that could be, for some people, volunteering, right? To give back. However, here's a piece of advice. Do what's meaningful to you, not your roommate, not your parents, and not your professor. What do you find interesting? So for example, if you really don't like gardening, then volunteering for the gardening club is not going to work for you. If you don't like kids, then going to the local nursery school and reading to children is really not going to be the right fit. So look in the mirror, decide what actually fills your heart with joy, volunteer for that organization, and therefore you might meet people who share your similar interests and passion, and then go deep in that organization. Don't spread yourself thin. By going deep with one volunteer opportunity or job or whatever you're working on, gives you the opportunity to develop relationships over time. You might see the same people every Tuesday night at 6 by going every Tuesday night at 6 instead of going once and never going again. To position yourself to make these connections is about repetition, it's about consistency, and doing what's meaningful to you.
Joe, can I just add something to that as well? Because this is also very dear to making care in common and what we do. While I totally agree, you of course want to find things that are meaningful to you, otherwise you're not going to stick with them. We really emphasize that also finding things meaningful for others as well, like to you, but that still have others in mind. We talk a lot about moral purpose and the need to really, think about others, because ultimately we know there's so much research out there to show that helping others actually helps us. And we know that. And another thing to the point about,
I love that, by the way. Love it.
thank you. And
Yeah.
and of course I totally agree with you too that quality relationships are so important. We write about that all the time. But I also do think diverse relationships and having, maybe not so many, but broad types of relationships matters because you might not get fulfilled in one area, right? But get fulfilled, in another area by someone else. Because that also goes back to what we find is that loneliness is not just a single experience, it's multifaceted. It might be that you don't belong to groups, but also that you don't feel deep emotional support. Or that you just don't have enough friends. Like we found 25% of adults saying they don't have enough friends. So I just don't want to lose that point too.
Yes, we talked so much about all sorts of things, and there's so many great questions here. I can tell that we might have some parents here because they're saying, as summer is approaching, what suggestions might you have for summer programs focused on teens and tweens to foster community? And maybe rather than specific examples, we can talk about maybe some threads that might run across, right, that parents may actually want to look for. And this will be our final question. Eric, I wonder if we can go to you.
Yeah, I would say it just starts with the mentality. I think you're right. Instead of having a specific like list and programs and like things to follow, I think it's just being intentional. If parents are a huge impact. I write about that a lot, about the impact that parents have on college students, because it's a stereotype that it's not, but they're still one of the biggest influences on that cohort. But just being very intentional and encouraging the students to be very intentional, especially if you have a student coming into college and this is the first summer or that, before college, there's a lot of anxiety about that. So being very intentional about how you're going to spend time like with the community that you already have in the high schools and things like that. So my answer would be very broad, just have in terms of having just an intentional mentality of doing it.
Thank you. Milena or Allison, would you like to add anything to that for our last question?
I think it's always important to also ask for input, right? Or talk to your kid. What do they want to do? What are they into? And if the questions I get a lot from parents are, well, what if they don't want to do anything, right? What if they're not interested? What if they just want to stay home and game and be on social media? Well, like model what it means to want, to do things, right? So I think us modeling the very things we want in our kids is important. And then just like just take them out and do things with them. And I think over time that might motivate and encourage wanting to actually put themselves out there.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Dr. Ruth, as she was fondly known, said that loneliness is curable, that people have the power to fight it. And one of the ways that people can actually feel less alone is by talking openly about loneliness. And we've done just that, thanks to our guests, Milena, Batanova, Allison, Gilbert, and Eric Wood. Thank you so much for joining us and for all the wisdom and discernment that you've shared. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks, everyone.